Uh, I do want to say before Brother Johns comes, because he's leaving this evening, I appreciate Brother Darrell Johns so very, very much. I thank God for our Assistant General Superintendent. I thank God, and this is not a political statement, this is just from a fellow team member. I thank God for the leadership team that we have in the United Pentecostal Church. I thank God for the leaders that He has provided for us. We are blessed because of their leadership. Brother Petoskey, may I turn it to you, or do you want me to just turn it to Brother Johns? All right, Brother Johns, God bless you. Let's welcome Brother Johns one more time as he comes.
Tremendous teaching, practical, in the trenches. Amen. I think it's important, all that he said, but the idea of being proactive and trying to take initiative. I know you can show too much initiative, but to try to find that way to lift the load for everybody. And just a couple of related things. This session is on effective team leadership meetings, so this is a related subject. But we try to teach our people, you serve where you're gifted, but you also serve where you're needed. My first job was a bag boy in a grocery store working for Pastor Ken Elliott's dad. He was a supervisor of 6 stores or 8 at times. So kids in the church could get a job with Winn-Dixie if you'd really work. So they taught us to pick it up, don't pass it up. If you saw a piece of trash, like, oh, where's the janitor here? So I am the official trash pusher downer everywhere I go. Airport, restaurants, it doesn't matter. Because I just think, man, but I've never found that as my spiritual gift. But I need to do that. So, if you're gifted to sing or speak or play an instrument, that doesn't mean that's the only place you serve. Sometimes you serve maybe in not the place that's your sweet spot, but there's a need there, and you step in and you fill that need. So I think that's a really important idea to understand and being proactive. So we're going to talk about effective team leadership meetings. And let me turn my phone over so I can see my time here. First of all, there's some biblical concept behind this, but there's a lot of different ways to conduct meetings. Depends on your personality type, the nature of your team. I'm going to try to hit a smattering of different kinds of teams. Some of this may have application in a secular context or not. But I'm always trying to start with the Bible. What principles can I learn from the Bible? What examples are there? So I'm not going to drill down in them very much, but I thought about Moses and his leaders, captains over thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s. And small problems could percolate up to Moses, where he'd have to deal with the big stuff, but I wouldn't think that came to him first. I'm all about what you said before church. I want to be focused. Don't ambush me, with something after church. I'm pretty chilled and stay and fellowship and hang out and all of that. But problems would make their way up to Moses. Rehoboam met with his counselors. Remember that? The older men gave him good advice. The younger men, the ones he'd grown up with, gave him bad advice. But there was a communication that they had. There was a leadership meeting. Jesus had small meetings with his disciples and then some with the inner circle. After the ascension of Jesus, in Acts 1, the disciples got together to talk about who would replace Judas Iscariot. So there was a meeting there in Acts chapter 1. In Acts chapter 6, the apostles got together and they kind of had to come up with a plan. We've got these complaining widows, these Grecian widows, Hellenistic widows, and we need to come up with a benevolence committee. And then we're going to have to go to the people and tell them, look out among you 7 men full of the Holy Ghost, honest report, wisdom, that we may set over this business. So they had to collaborate on that problem that they were solving in the church. The Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 involved hearing from different parties and then what seemed good to them in the Holy Ghost. But if you go back and look at that meeting in Acts chapter 15, it was more complex than you would think. I would liken it to a general board meeting. And then Paul met with Ephesian leaders in Acts chapter 20. That was more of a teaching session where he was training them. I don't claim to be an expert in meetings, but I have spent a lot of time in meetings. In March of this year, I was talking to someone about all the meetings I had been in, and true to my personality, I started trying to figure that out. So I went back, and I'm not asking you to be impressed, depressed, sympathetic, or jealous, but I started trying to remember as best I could. In Mississippi, 18 days of youth committee, 40 days on the general committee, parts of 40 days, 240 days in meetings with the Global Missions Board from 97 to 13. Those were very long meetings. 12 days with the Division of Education, 13 days on the Gateway Board, 45 days on the Georgia District Board. Most of those are all day. 30 days on the Urshan Board, 66 days on the General Board, 13 days on the Executive Board, 104 days in trustee board meetings in Atlanta West in 27 years, probably 3 to 5 hours. 7 days on a church board, another church board, and a couple hours on another church board. 9 meetings at Tupelo Children's Mansion. 1,125 meetings at our staff in our church. And I just said 25 years times 45 weeks. So I was trying to be careful. 230 meetings with our 301 leaders, monthly meetings. And then I've been involved in other committee meetings like a Preterism Commission and Church Bylaws of Detroit Metro, Michigan, General Constitution Committee, Judicial Procedure Committee, Local Church Government Committee, Ministry Central, Passing the Mantle, Capital Stewardship, Strategic Growth, Reach Out America, Executive Global Council, Tabernacle. But taking away like some of those really like Atlanta West, at least part or all of 591 days. I know I said 1,000. I just took those out because that's like a staff meeting in our local church. So I don't know how to do this very well, but I've done a lot. I've been in a lot of meetings, chaired some, and been part of others. I try to think through meetings in a church, trustee board for us with my core pastors, staff, 301 leaders, and all volunteers. So I meet with all of those groups as a pastor. And then in our church, we have departmental meetings, and we ask them to meet at least twice a year. Some need to meet more, but nursery, children, and crossover, those go together. Youth and hyphen together. Small groups, depends on the semester, training, meeting, and then they do a review after the semester's over. Our safety team, at least twice a year, probably more like 4. Music team meetings, production team. I'm not in all these meetings. Altar workers, guest experience, ushers, parking team. And then in a district board, district departmental leaders. So how many of you are in a district department here in Connecticut? You serve on one of the committees, NAM, youth, children, ladies, men. Okay. So a lot of committees there, and then various other committees. And in the section, you may or may not meet with people. So I have all of that in mind. I can't say that I'm going to specifically nail, so many super practical applications for you, but I have that many kinds of meetings in mind with some of the things I'm going to say, and I'll abbreviate some of this. Every team meeting, every group should have a common goal. We've talked about the mission multiple times already today. That is a common goal that you have. But a good team has different roles while a common goal or common goals. So usually, if I'm going to give an illustration about sports, it's football. Grew up in Miami, Pastor Ken and me, and so that was the Dolphins way back then. So if I know about any sport, it might be that sport, but you don't want everybody to be a wide receiver, a running back, or the quarterback. You understand, but we have the same goal line, but it would be dumb to make everybody a 330-pound lineman, right? So I think it is a sign of immaturity when we want everybody to be just like us. When you put people together in your church by likenesses, that's so you can teach them something. So I mentioned affinity groups or free market small groups where they're together because of a common interest. But when you build a team, you intentionally build that team by diversity. That gives opportunity for some conflict and clashing, sort of like a marriage. It can be a clash or a complement, but a husband should see his wife the way God designed her to complete him. She was taken out of man. She's his helpmeet. She is the completion of him. So teams do that. I realize after many years that I have a few strengths and a lot of weaknesses. And God made the body of Christ like that. We're not all an eye, ear, ear, nose on purpose. So anyone who thinks that they're God's gift to everything and everyone is fully deluded. And the more I realize that I have strengths, my favorite Chinese fortune cookie nailed my strengths and my weaknesses. It said, your great attention to detail is both a blessing and a curse. And I taped it to my, back in the day, headquarters, my office phone. Like, that's me. And this is who I am. And it's really good and it's really bad. My strength can undermine me because every positive trait has a negative counterpart, right? There's a downside to every personality, to every gifting. That's why, for me, I need different age groups of people that have access to me, and I also need people with different giftings and personalities who see things differently than me so they can help me, save me from myself, right? And they make our team much stronger. So I wanted you to see that, teams need to have a common goal but different roles. Satan is a divider, and he will divide us over our distinctives, over our differences, and he will drive a wedge, whether it is a home or a church. He's always trying to drive a wedge. And when you know that, then you can address that and be aware of it. We're not ignorant of his devices. Teams also should have cooperation, the ability to get along and realize that we can achieve so much more together than we can alone. The Lone Ranger is dead. And I have, various leadership team meeting sessions, but on team building, and I went through the Bible, not everything, I'm sure, but I was amazed at how many teams there were in the Bible, all the way throughout the times of the kings. In the New Testament, Jesus, Paul, they had teams to work together in cooperation, and then the linking of departments one with another, so you don't operate in a silo. You're not just doing your own thing, but you need to recognize and appreciate everybody else that's doing something else. You should advocate for your team, but your team is not the most important team in the church or in the district. It's one of many teams. So I've, from my youth, I've been involved with youth. Even now, I just like it. But so I like to think about Sheaves for Christ or Move the Mission, but because that's my background. But I've come to realize a long time ago, not yesterday, that I need to be careful to not make that the most important thing in the district or the church, because not everybody is all in for that. They may have a passion for something else. So there has to be a lot of cooperation on the team and between teams and churches or the district. Communication, which has already been talked about, is so key. And I read something years ago that the Lone Ranger is dead, right? But if you're going to work on a team, you need to communicate. And I found that sometimes leaders are loners. Brother Gaddy talked about time alone. I like to have time alone, and I've learned that if I don't have time alone, I'm not good for anybody when I'm with them. So I've tried to teach our church I have to have time with God, my wife, our family, if I'm going to be any good to all of you. So when am I going to do that? I'm going to create margin. I'm going to push back. I'm not always going to be available if it's not an emergency. If it's an emergency, 24/7, 365, it never ends, and I'm available. It doesn't matter. So, but I have to have some time. But as a leader, you can kind of want that space. But I have learned that you have to continually communicate. If you don't respond to texts and emails and phone calls, it's going to be hard to lead a team. People need to hear from you. They need to be in the loop. People, this is later in my notes, I think, but I heard this phrase and I love it, that people tend to be down on what they're not up on. So in meetings, you need to communicate. You need to make sure people know what is going on. help people know. And then the final thing about there's 4 things, is commitment to serve in a team and to have effective meetings as teams. There has to be a commitment to this cause. So now I want to give you just some tips, what I think are tips to effective meetings. First of all, to lead means to be out front. Totally different subject, but a leader is not the same as a hero. A hero can do things you can't. A hero can dunk a basketball. Obviously, I can't. Never been an aspiration of mine because I didn't feel like I had the gifting for that. But a leader helps you believe and equips you to be able to do it. So I have a study on David. David was an incredible hero. Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands. But what I love about David is he was able to rally around him men that were in their own rights heroic. To kill a lion in a pit on a snowy day. He respected the people around him, and instead of attracting people who couldn't do anything, he attracted people that were much like him because he was a better leader than he was a hero. A hero is way out in front of everybody else. A leader is a step or two. And if you project yourself as a hero, the person that can run faster, jump higher, do everything better than everyone else, people tend to stand back and watch you burn. But if you believe in people and you communicate to them and transfer that authority to them, they'll go with you. That helps elicit commitment. So if you're a leader, though, you need to prepare. So I want to talk about the preparation. It takes discipline and hard work. I sat down with a departmental leader maybe 20 years ago. He's over outreach. And we were going to talk about some things, and we sat down in my office, and he had a blank piece of paper. Piece of paper. And so I just thought we'd kind of brainstorm and talk. And I really had to control my feelings right then. Like, you came to talk to me about something you're over, and you have a blank piece of paper? I was very kind in the way I said that. So here's what I would like for you to do. We'll talk, but this is not a brainstorming session. We already know what this role is. I really would like for you to think and plan, and when we sit down, let me approve or help shape it, but don't come with a blank piece of paper. That's not good leadership. But as a leader of a lot of meetings, I spend a lot of time planning for those meetings. Every Monday morning, with very few exceptions, I meet with my core pastors at 10:30 a.m. I preach usually twice on Sunday, unless I have a guest preacher. I go home, I take a little time off. I try to plan this ahead. We use Basecamp as a tool for all meetings in our church and planning events. So I spend sometimes several hours, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It just depends. On Sunday evening, I've tried to work ahead, but usually I still have to, getting ready for Monday morning. I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you that I know when I walk in that meeting at 10:30, I have to be prepared. And the guys that are sitting there, they can also put, anything into the meeting. There's a place for everyone to contribute to that agenda, but there's a working agenda. And for 27 years, every weekly staff meeting, back when it was a Word document, there's a certain format of things we discuss every week, but it's always done. And people say, have accused me of having a gift of administration, and I've told people, and my wife especially, when I'm sitting up working late, some people like to get up early, I tend to work late, I don't feel a gift in operation. Like a gift is when it just happens. But this feels like work to me. I don't know that this is a gift. I think it's a commitment to making meetings happen. So you need to prepare. You need to prepare ahead. And as I mentioned in the last session, we use Planning Center for scheduling, but Basecamp for meeting. And effective meetings. We're talking about effective team meetings. So planning, but also consistency. I have to work by a calendar. And I have learned if I put something on the calendar, it forces me to prepare for it. But if I don't put it on the calendar, then it tends to just get pushed off. So how often do you meet with whomever that is? Whatever group or team that you want to meet with, I recommend that you schedule that, put it in the calendar, set up reminders. We use Google Calendar. And then tell yourself, for me, I email myself, so I make sure that I'm trying to be ready for that meeting. So effective to me means consistent, announced, reminded, and to be effective, they have to be consistent. In our church, I've learned most everybody nowadays would rather have a text than an email. I'm probably the exception to that, but I can flag an email, I can go back to it. Today, while we've been here, while Brother Gaddy was speaking, I had a person from a district I'm going to go to in a few weeks send me a long text and a W-9 form by a text message. My standard reply is, thank you very much. Please send me an email. Here's my email address. That just works for me. But I've learned I have to communicate the way other people do as well. So sometimes that's more than one way to make sure I announce a meeting and make sure that they're there. To me, an effective meeting often means food. Food. Because I believe that hungry people are grouchy people. Hangry people. Right? So, every Monday we bring in lunch, but we provide it for everybody else on staff that while we eat, and we eat and talk. Because you can only, and these meetings are too long. I will confess that my meetings last too long. Our meetings last too long. So I can't teach you about doing that. Efficient, short meetings. But very often we have food and fellowship, and we just kind of talk non-shop stuff because that's really, we're really busy, and that's an opportunity for fun. I am not a good guy, not very good, and maybe on purpose by my nature, at going to lunch and sitting around and having lunch with everybody. That's a great thing, but I don't do that very well. So you have to ask somebody else about that. To me, meetings should be relaxed. You know, I was a district superintendent for 9 years. District boards are very intimidating when you walk into district board. So I've been in a lot of meetings, as you heard a while ago. So I try to warm it up. There are times you have to be really stern. You're dealing with someone's license, their life and ministry. They're going to pull their license or they have to resign. There are some very difficult things you deal with. But I try to warm those meetings up. When someone comes into that room, a department head or a ministerial candidate, I will go to the other end of the board table, not at my austere seat over here. I'm not district superintendent now. And stand by them and introduce them to the board and sit down with them. When I've had to tell someone we're getting ready to put you out under question, I will go sit by them and talk to them like this instead of in that distant seat. Even though I'm having to do something that's really painful to them, I want them to know that it is redemptive relationally and spiritually. So my personal opinion is that you need to warm meetings up. Now, I know that also I was at a district conference that I was leading in a state one time, and there was one person that just kept standing up over and over. They were going to sell their campground. They asked me to lead that resolution so I would be crucified and not the superintendent. But they had already had the knockdown drag out the year before, so this meeting went rather well. But this one person, and finally I said, brother, you've spoken 4 times, and I think that's enough. Is there anyone else? So I think to have an effective meeting, it should not be dominated by one person, whatever meeting it is. So you can kind of lay some ground rules ahead of time, or you can politely say, I think we've heard that enough. I've learned that usually in a meeting that, something may have been said 3 times, but if that person didn't say it, they want to make sure they get to say that too. So that's sometimes difficult to say, look, not without being disrespectful, 4 other people have made that same point. So that's hard to do, but I'm just saying that for all the district board members here, I guess, maybe. So to me, effective meetings are somewhat relaxed. And then effective in meetings, to me means process. And I want to talk a little bit off the subject, but on the subject. But when something has been decided, it has to be embraced by various levels of people. So I ask these questions: who needs to know? What do they need to know? Now I'm thinking in terms of a church. It could be a district, okay, but mainly in a church. Who needs to know? What do they need to know? When do they need to know it? How should they be told? I'm amazed that in our culture, young people break up with a text message. You know, the things that are done in personal, perhaps sometimes a cowardly way. So how should they be told, and from whom should they be told? So who needs to know? What do they need to know? When do they need to know? And how do they need to be told, and from whom? So let me just give you a working example. So in our church, we have a trustee board. We're in the middle of a big discussion now, months long, the potential of a building program. So that's trustee board. That's the governing body. And then from there, my pastoral leadership team. Well, we did a lot of the legwork, but we don't have, that team doesn't have the authority to make that decision, and neither does the board by themselves. But I want my pastoral staff to know next, not last. And if you have a spouse and it's not a confidential matter, you may want to think about telling your spouse early on, not last. One time I agreed to serve in a role. I thought I told my wife, got her permission. We were in a staff meeting. She didn't usually come, but she did. And I just told everybody I've agreed to serve, blah, 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 in this role in the organization. And she looked at me and said, what? I didn't know we decided, like it's a mutual agreement. It's going to be travel and whatever. And I was so embarrassed and apologetic, and I've tried to never do that again. For us, affected employees, and then for us, our 301 leaders. I talked about that in the last meeting, but I want those people to know next. Now, I've learned that is not a confidential group. Staff board, I think, is different. I remember being in a youth committee meeting many years ago when Brother Jerry Jones was youth president. I was a secretary, and he said to the youth planning committee, I believe, youth planning committee board, I would like to say that anything you say in this room will stay in this room. I would like to tell you that, but I can't. So you need to think about confidential matters and who you tell. Unfortunately, and I'm not trying to be down on human nature, a lot of people have at least one best friend who has at least one best friend. So before something goes viral, you need to think about, did the right people know first, second, third before everybody knows? I would not stand up in front of our entire church and say, we're going to do this, and if we decide to do some building campaign, there's a lot of communication that has to happen to get everybody an opportunity to get on board. If the train leaves the station and it's going 50 miles an hour, and you invite the trustees or the staff or the leaders to get on board, that's poor leadership, in my opinion. They need to get on board before the train leaves the station or when it's moving very slowly, because your trusted people will help shape the outcome. All right? They're going to make it better if you will listen to them. And they deserve to be on that decision early on, not along with the general public. So for us, I said 301 leaders, volunteers, and church body. I want to share a few communication ethics. I've already said confidentiality. In our trustee board, there are some things we say. We had a new board member come on, and he said, can I tell my wife? And another one of my board members just like, no. Like, this is confidential in this room. Some things, not everything, but it stays in this room. Other things, I've said you can share this with your spouse. And then participation. Now, I'm going to talk a little more about district and church a little bit too. When I was district superintendent, we have a selection process for a speaker. But typically, before you invite a speaker to come, you would contact a district superintendent. If that person's not a pastor, you would contact their pastor. For us, we have a speaker pool. We have an open discussion. We actually have a secret ballot vote that is a weighted vote. You vote for your first choice speaker with 3, 2, 1, and that's how speakers are selected in Georgia. I'm no longer superintendent as of January of this year. In the district, we created a sectional youth leader appointment. So sectional youth leaders, I know you have, your sections are not so much geographic here, but you still have sections and leaders. So we had this process, and I'm saying this because of effective meetings and not causing confusion, all right? So this is a little off the subject, but on the subject. Every 2 years, there's going to be an opening. So we always have this committee, the presbyter, the departmental leader, and the district superintendent. That's a committee. And you consult with them first, and you get consensus on that person. It can be initiated by the departmental leader or the presbyter. And they're discussed, and you decide. But you do not contact that candidate just to see if they would be interested. If they have a pastor, you contact the pastor first. You don't ever cut the presbyter out of the loop. And I've had people tell me, well, I just wanted to see if they would be interested. Well, you've really put yourself in a really bad spot, as well as the presbyter, the departmental leader. And we usually ask the presbyter to shepherd that process of going to the pastor before you do that. So I have this policy that we created and our board, approved, and it's in the Georgia District Policy Manual. Somebody asked me about policies. You have policies in a district, you have to have them. And we make sure that that person is vetted. We don't want to hurt their feelings. And we always say, try to bring 3 candidates if possible. Some sections are very small, and there's only 1 candidate. So that's pretty important to me, that you process decisions in the right way. And if the first person declines, then you move down that role. And I have a bunch of stuff like that. Okay. Effective meetings. I want to talk about listening. Leaders who listen. During COVID, we started having our 301 meetings online. You asked about half the people coming and half not. Our people live anywhere from 5 minutes to 45 minutes or an hour away from church. So typically, for many years, first Tuesday of the month is a 301 meeting on campus. But these people are having to drive 45 minutes for a 1-hour meeting and go home once a month. So during COVID, we started meeting online. But I have a much better participation. However, it tends to be one way. I have an agenda. They get all the notes the next day. My secretary sends them. So because it's a prayer list, it's the calendar, I want everybody to know. But I found out in those online meetings, Zoom meetings, that people tend to not speak. And there's sometimes that's okay, but it's not good for collaboration. I would not make a decision that way. But you could do a hybrid of in person and then stream it, or whatever you decide, where those other people maybe could attend remotely if drive and work and all of that is an issue. So I'll just throw that out there. So we are in this process I told you about, really preliminary, but I've announced to them a potential in-person meeting in September. So even after COVID, we've stayed online. It just has worked better. More people are there. And my secretary knows who's there, takes attendance, and we see who's on that meeting. But it has not worked very well at all for me listening. I'm not getting good feedback from people that I trust. And I know I need their feedback. So I think you should listen to advice, to the needs of people. You should listen to criticism. If a person is hurting, they may be a little emotional. If they've been upset about something, they may not exhibit all the fruit of the Spirit, And so you have to listen to sometimes your critics, listen to ideas, and listen to the heart of people, something they may not be saying. In our trustee board, and I have an amazing board in our church, sometimes you could win a vote. Sometimes I can tell by a discussion, whether it's the board or a committee through the years or our trustee board, that I could take a vote, secret ballot or voice vote, and I could win. But it's not consensus. And consensus is not the same as a vote. And if I have somebody that I trust, and all those people are trusted people, that is holding out and has a reservation, I've tried to learn to not railroad my idea through, because God may be using that person to slow me down. So I just want to say this about effective meetings, that sometimes it may not go as fast as you want because you're trying to listen and communicate. You're not a salesman trying to just sell an idea that isn't flying. I had a person that used to work for us that told me, here's an idea. And I said, I don't think we're going to do that. And they made attempt number 2 to tell me what we needed to do. And I said, we're not going to do that. They made a 3rd attempt. They said, but you don't understand. And I said, finally, you know what? I understand, but we're not going. But you don't know, we're not going to do that. So I believe in listening, and sometimes you just got to give it up, right? So we're talking about leaders that listen to ideas. What would have happened if Moses would not have listened to his father-in-law Jethro, who had an objective observation about Moses sitting all day long, listening to people in a long line, never getting all the needs met? I've referred to this already. And they would have never had the solution of multi-level, not marketing, but organization. So I think we need to create an environment that is conducive to listening to people. The older you get, and I hope you don't misunderstand this, the more successful you are perceived to be, the less likely people are to tell you the truth. So you have to really work at them telling you the truth, what you need to see. So in our church, in our leadership, not so much in the congregation, I will use that biblical story about the emperor's new clothes. You all know that, right? Yeah, in the book of Hezekiah, the emperor's new clothes. You'll find it there. Just look. It may take you a while, but it's in the book of Hezekiah. But I love this story because here's a man who has created a culture where no one will tell him the truth. Right? He has the swindlers. I just read this story the other day, not for here, but for another meeting. And I'd read it all again. Hans Christian Andersen. And all the people know that if they tell the emperor the truth, they'll get fired. They'll lose influence with him. Pardon me for being this plain. I know that we are recording this. But they would rather let their leader be naked in front of the whole kingdom than to tell him that's a terrible mistake. And only a little boy who had nothing to lose was brave enough to tell the emperor, you have no clothes. I don't want to be that guy. And I often say, if my boat goes down, I will never be in it alone, because I will not act unilaterally. And if I'm preaching truth, you die on that hill. If it's a principle, you die on that hill. I do not decide what I preach by committee. You hear from God what you talked about. But if we're going to build a building, if we're going to move, if we're going to start something new, I can't do that by myself. I need consensus. And I need to listen to people who have different views, opposing views at times, that may slow me down. But one of the greatest dangers that I see, especially in spiritual leadership, is that we feel like if we receive something, that we are lowering ourselves in the respect of people, because we're the man of God, we speak from God, and touch not God's anointed. And there's a dimension of that. There's also the dimension of how many people do you want to follow you? One, none? Or do you want people to feel that they're in this? This is their church, and that they're following you because they believe in this. So I'm going to just address the idea that I'm kind of talking about now. Talked about communication, talked about listening, but about building consensus. I referred to this a while ago. This is where it's in my notes. There's a difference between building consensus and getting a vote. I've been elected to a couple of positions in my lifetime by a very narrow margin. When I became pastor at Atlanta West, it was a very close vote. It was a divided church. It was not a pretty situation. It was a very ugly, difficult, painful situation, and the first year was a terrible year for my family and me. But someone told me, when you're elected pastor, you're not really the pastor. Whether it's 100% or 51% or 60%, it is an opportunity to become the pastor. And it helped me because it was a pretty close vote. But I believed it was the will of God. So I went in because I had elders in my life that I listened to. And I said, I recognize that X% of you did not vote for me to be the pastor. I will never try to figure out who you are. It doesn't matter. I believe that I'm here in the will of God. All I ask is that you give me an opportunity to become your pastor. And I believe you earn it every day. And you never assume that you have. And after 27 years, you keep earning it every day by the way you lead and live and love and teach and preach and serve. You don't ever assume anything. And I'm not saying that you don't know people love you and you love them and there's a great relationship. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about arrogance and elitism and pride and exceptionalism, that you are above what is for everybody else. But when you build consensus, it comes by listening. It comes by asking questions. It comes by open communication in a meeting and a series of meetings where everybody works together to make the end result much better than it would have been if you did it simply alone. Voting is a win or lose model in which people are more often concerned about numbers and the win than the issue itself. Voting does not take into account individual feelings or needs. In essence, it is a quantitative rather than qualitative measure or method of decision making. In consensus, in meetings, people can and should work through their differences to reach a mutually satisfactory position. It may not be 100%, but as much as possible. Again, it's not whether I got my way, but are we going to do this? I read years ago that in an organization, if 70% of the people are not for that decision, it will fail. I'm not sure that's true or not, but here's what I'm saying. If I get 51% and I win by that 51%, I'm talking about a project, an idea, I won. But will that succeed with that level of buy-in? Or is there a way that I can go back and I can bring everybody along? If it's a God idea, and prayer and fasting and communication and layering that over a period of time, because there are early adopters that are going to jump on every new idea, all the way to people who are laggards, who are just slow in coming along. So I think you need to build consensus, and it's more painful and it takes time, and there are some difficulties with people who don't support it, who have reservations, who stand aside, who try to block you, who withdraw from the group. They just leave because they're not in that. But over time, when you know here's the alternatives, you weigh the options, and after you agree to that, then you can move forward together, not just by winning a vote, but with consensus. So, because this is somewhat of a broad topic with a lot of applications, church, departments, business, district, I wanted to be a little more wide than narrow in the way I talked about this, and with a variety of things that may help you just think. And I want to scan through, because this is this long section on consensus that I don't want to spend that much time on. All right. So, if you're going to see and do something new, people need to see it clearly. You need to see it clearly. You should say it creatively and show it constantly. And I believe in what would be like a trickle-down effect, that if you get the right people on board early on, and then you gradually bring people into that conversation, that if it's a God thing, if it's the best thing, that people will buy in, and you can move the most people forward. Many years ago, we built a family life center. My closing comment, not in my notes, but just popped in my mind. Family life center. 20,000 square feet, 100 feet long, 150 feet long, 100 feet wide. It's a big building. Part of it's 2-story. And we had budgeted $50,000 for site work. It was a huge project, 2,000. I've been the pastor 5 years when we started this process. And the church was coming together. We're excited about this. And we got into this project. I didn't have a great architect. I should have had a builder's rep. Some things we did wrong. Our builder was okay, but not great. We get into this project and we start running into huge cost overruns. The first time we voted as a church to build that building, there were 4 people who did not vote for it. 4 people. And I don't remember the number of voters, but it was quite a few. So after we got into this project, this is an embarrassing thing to say, but it happened. We saw that we were going to spend an additional $1 million. Now, I don't know how much $1 million is to you, but $1 million to me is a lot of money. From $1.5 million to $2.5 million projected project expenses. I couldn't sleep. I was so upset at myself, thinking, poor leadership, you're so dumb. Say dumb in Connecticut, thank you. I was just so upset at myself. And our board was on board, and we'd all done all this together. But still, you know that people in the congregation are saying, man, these are the people leading this organization, and they've just made $1 million error. Well, we had a time to talk, and we had an open business meeting, and I walked everybody through the process. This is what happened. Here's what happened with site work. $10,000 we put in a fire hydrant. $600,000 before we pour concrete. This is where this project turned into a $2.5+ million project. And I listened. People ask questions. Very uncomfortable for me. Super uncomfortable. At the end, resolution to spend an additional $1 million with discretion of the trustee board if it went over that, and it did. Secret ballot vote, 4 people voted against it the second time around. And when that happened, I felt like, okay, there's a tremendous amount of trust in this church, but also there's a lot of transparency. And what I feel like is probably the most foolish thing, that I had done as a pastor up until that time. Maybe if you go ask people there, they could think of something else since then. But up until that time, I was 40 years old, so I was 45 at that time, 46, something like that. And looked really young back then, by the way. So here's people thinking this young buck guy, he's never been a pastor till now, and now he's just done this, and all of that. But I feel like because of the way we conducted that with openness and transparency, a lot of prayer and fasting and sleepless nights and prayer, and the Lord helped us, and we had the same outcome in terms of people supporting that new project. I don't glory in what happened, but I thank God that if you're honest, if you're straightforward, if you're willing to let people be a part of the decision-making process, generally, I know that there's rebellious people and all of that. Generally, it will be honored because of the way you conduct meetings and process. Now, it's 3:11. Take a few questions or comments. And again, I intentionally made this session kind of broad to talk about, communication and all of that. So I think they want you to come to a mic. I know it's time to eat. I have a plane to catch in just a little while, but I'm willing to. Great question. It depends on the venue. So, church board, district board. There's some things in our church board. I will say I'm not asking for a vote on this, but I want to know your feelings. So, in our church, I hire and fire. But if I bring someone from the outside, I always have them meet the board. I don't vote on that, but I listen and have consensus. In the district board and some decisions in our church board, we're going to invest the money in the loan fund. I want a vote, and it should be a vote. In the district board, we vote on almost everything because it's in the minutes, it's an official record. You know, when the new superintendent takes over, they can go back and it was duly acted on. In minutes, by the way, I don't think it's every word of the conversation, but it's the decisions that were made. So this and that depends on the committee or the board. Our 301 leaders, we don't vote on anything. It's not a voting body. So part of it is the nature of that body. Is it a voting body? Our church, to make big decisions, we would vote. We remodeled our sanctuary and spent $300,000 in 2014. We didn't vote on that. We put in air conditioning, $110,000. We didn't vote on that. So it depends the size of the organization, the amount of money, and what your governance is. Those were board decisions. The board voted on that. Yes. That's right. If it's in the bylaws, you live by that. Or you have an opportunity to change the bylaws and you do it by due process. But don't ever ask for forgiveness when you should have gotten permission. Do it right. Yes. Yes. So you say it all the time, creatively in different ways, but I read this years ago. I think I heard it and then I tried to find it in Nehemiah's day that they said the vision was in jeopardy after 21 days. I can't prove that, but some of you can find it and email it to me. Don't text it. No, anyway, no, just kidding. You can text it. But I don't know that the vision is in danger in 21 days. But I know this, I taught in the first session in creating culture all the time. You reinforce your mission, vision, who you are, what you're trying to do. I'm not saying you can't overstate it, and that was recorded if you weren't here, but over and over and over. Yeah. All right, I'm going to turn it to your superintendent. It's been an honor to be here. I appreciate everybody's attentiveness and a long day of sessions. Great to be in the hospitality here and thoughtfulness, the spirit of Connecticut, and what I see God doing, what Brother Gaddy mentioned to you a while ago. I think God has great things for this district. It's been an honor to be here. I appreciate Brother Dibble, Brother Petoskey for your hospitality, and Brother Gaddy, like always so much of a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Brother Johns. Let's stand and give a great ovation of appreciation and love for Brother Johns and Brother Gaddy. What an awesome, awesome job they've done today.